That sounds great. And I think we're going to go ahead and get started since it's 12:05.
All right.
So, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out today for this webinar. To introduce myself, my name is Bailey, and I am the Assistant Manager for the Aquaculture Information Exchange. I also intern with the Virginia Sea Grant and am a first-year Master of Arts student at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. Before we start off this webinar, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping things before I introduce our guest speaker for today. For those of you who may not be familiar, this webinar is a part of a series hosted by the Aquaculture Information Exchange, and we also call it the AIE for short. This is an online community that involves individuals from both the public and private sectors with interests in U.S. aquaculture. And this is a wonderful place for sharing aquaculture-related resources, asking questions, looking for aquaculture-related jobs, and creating meaningful connections with others in the field. So I'm going to drop in the chat a link for everyone to register for those of you who may not be registered. It's super easy. It is completely free. And we now have a feature where you can use your Google or LinkedIn account to quickly sign up. And I hope to connect with you all on that platform following this webinar. And just so all of you are aware, this webinar will be publicly accessible on the AIE Connect and Learn group and also on the AIE YouTube channel, which I will also link in the chat now. This meeting is being recorded and you will be able to find this presentation on our YouTube channel publicly accessible for sharing purposes. So I will link that there. Be sure to subscribe over there. So now that that's all out of the way, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest speaker for today's webinar, Lucy Bellwood. Lucy is a professional adventure cartoonist, author, and educator based in California, and she will be giving a talk on illustrating aquaculture, a journey into kelp farming. Welcome, Lucy, and thank you for giving this talk for us today.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. New people coming in the chat. Audra, I'm so excited you're here. I was just thinking about your RSS comic in terms of niche nonfiction content that I could share with people while I was here. I am going to go ahead. Can I spotlight myself? Pin. There we go. Pin. I'm large. Maybe just for me, maybe not for you, but it helps me see what I'm doing with my hands. So welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I am going to give a probably like 20 to 30 minute talk about what it is that I do, some of the work that I've been doing with ocean rainforest and blue robotics down here in California over the last 6 months or so. I am getting over a virus, so forgive me if I stop to do a little bit of coughing every now and again. Like that, it's first thing in the morning. Hopefully that's going to decrease as the talk goes on. And at the end, I'm hoping we can open it up for a little bit of discussion and exchange between the many visual artists that we have in the community here, and then also the folks who are more from the aquaculture sector. This is absolutely a dream opportunity for me to like push the people that I think are very cool into a room together and make them talk to each other, which is really the best part of doing what I do. So feel free to say stuff in the chat as we go along. If you have links to work that you have done, I said this earlier, but I'll just repeat it because I feel very strongly about it, that if you are a cartoonist and you've made something you're really proud of in the nonfiction space, please share it. I do want everyone to be able to connect with each other about the excellent work you're all doing. And if you are also in the aquaculture space, I'm going to have this be a little bit more of a specific discussion at the end, but I do want you to be thinking about what concepts and facts and figures and things in your field you might be really hungry for explanation or illumination around. What are the things that you're curious and hungry to get out to a wider audience and haven't really been able to bridge that gap? So without further ado, I am going to share my screen. Not that screen, and nor that screen, but this screen. Okay. And of course, Zoom always puts the toolbar right at the top, so you can't reach the little button that lets you present. Here we go. All right. Everybody seeing slides on the screen? I assume so. Great. And one other thing I would like to be able to do is see the meeting chat. So I am going to set that up on the side. Okay. Welcome, welcome. So this is illustrating aquaculture. Thank you to the Aquaculture Information Exchange for having me today. And we are going to get right into it. This is me, Lucy Bellwood, adventure cartoonist. This is a job title that we are going to get into in slightly more detail in the next slide. Here it is. What is an adventure cartoonist? It is actually a job that I made up, although those of you who work in science communication in this space probably would disagree because this is actually a whole field of interpreting nonfiction content for a lay audience and using words and pictures to bridge gaps in understanding. However, the thing that I do, I think, is a little bit different from traditional science illustration, although we were just talking about what even is a science communication degree these days. And I think the gift with cartooning is that it bridges a much wider range of subjects. You can apply it to absolutely anything. And the more I do this in my life and in my work, the more I realize this is a thing more people, especially cartoonists, should know about and do. And also, I have been doing it for 15 years at this point, and so I feel like whatever it is deserves to have its own job title. So I'm going to try and illuminate a little bit about what I mean when I say adventure cartoonist, and then help you understand how you can also have that job title as well, or make up your own. Frankly, you do you. So I've been at this for a long time. As a child, I was inherently drawn to ships and the sea. That it has only intensified as I've aged. You can see there's been a bit of an artistic development in the intervening 30 odd years between these drawings. And when I was going to put this presentation together, I was actually casting around the house to try and find some examples of the kinds of books I grew up with. And the things that I really remember sparking to as a kid when I look back and think, oh, there's a place that this came from is if anyone else had these eyewitness visual dictionaries as a child, they did a whole range of them on different subjects. There were pirates and ships and sailing and the ocean. I am naming ones that were more interesting to me. But of course, there were other subjects like trains, rivers, and still nature. I'm sure there were like mechanical ones that I was not as attracted to, but I really loved the nautical ones. They had, these kinds of super cool cutaway diagrams. And this, when I look back on it, I'm like, oh, this is science illustration, right? And as a kid, I didn't really register that somebody has to draw all of these things. And then, of course, we also had a book on tractors in the Internet Archive. Yeah, there's a lot of like machinery-based steam engines, right? That kind of thing. And then the real killer was this one. I had this book of incredible cutaway diagrams by an English illustrator. And not all of these were nautical, but of course I picked the boat one. And anything like this, any kind of art that really showed you the ins and outs of how something functioned, I was so attracted to. And then we're going to fast forward a large number of years because I slipped and became a tall ship sailor and started crewing aboard big 18th century sailing vessels. It's a pretty natural job progression. I think you will agree. Really, the pipeline from like Renaissance Festival attendee to tall ship sailor is pretty direct. Sorry, theater kid, Renaissance Festival attendee, tall ship sailor. And then, of course, cartoonist, obviously. And this came about because when I got into making comics, when I was in early college, I would say, I always tell people that I was pretty stupid about this. It took me a long time to realize that you can put words and pictures together in one industry, and it is called cartooning. But when I finally came around to it, I was casting about for interesting personal experiences I had had that I could turn into autobio comics, because at the time there were a lot of artists on the internet who were, especially women, who were making autobio or nonfiction comics and just publishing them for the heck of it without waiting to go the traditional syndication route or publishing route. And this was a huge inspiration to me, and ended up catapulting me into a career of doing this all the time, which is pretty incredible. For me, at least, I still pinch myself about it. But this book, Baggy Wrinkles, A Lover's Guide to Life at Sea, collected the first 4 years or so of my self-published mini comics about working on tall ships. And the thing that I found from sharing that book was that I had stumbled onto a very particular niche, right? People who are into tall ship sailing, who actually do it, very small community. People who are armchair tall ship sailors, your granddads and dads who are reading all of the Master and Commander series, that much larger community, but still kind of niche. And people in a niche love to see their thing reflected on the page, especially if it is accurate and conveys a little bit of humor and dynamism and illumination to it. So this niche, as I'm going to trace in the next few slides, led me to somehow making a poster about kelp farming in Southern California in 2025. And it makes sense in hindsight, but at the time, I cannot stress enough how much I have been winging it every step of the way. So if you are looking at this and thinking, that's cool, but how do I become a guy who makes comics about lighthouses professionally? Like, don't worry, wing it. It's going to go great. In the course of the last 15 years, though, there are some things that I have come to realize about what it is that cartoonists do that I want to zoom out and talk about briefly, because I think even in the industry, we forget this as artists. We find ourselves fixated on the challenges of the traditional publishing industry, which are many, or the pay rates in the mainstream comics industry, which are bad. And there are skills that we have all gained through our work in using words and pictures to tell stories that I think are important to zoom out and look at from a higher level. Hi, Gabriel. Glad you're here instead of packing for your trip, although I hope it's somewhere fun. So for cartoonists, we trade in characters and concepts. All of our storytelling has to do with explaining circumstances, narratives, ideas in words and pictures. And cartoonists are particularly good at creating and crafting characters. This is something where I think we diverge a little bit from traditional science illustration, because we're a little bit more geared towards bringing in people or animate, inanimate objects, or whatever you want to talk about to tell stories. And we're going to look at how that's particularly helpful for science communication down the line. The other things that we are very good at doing, distilling complexity. A lot of the time you can look at a cartoon and think, oh, or at a comic book and say, this drawing is pretty simple, right? You look at a peanut strip, any classic newspaper comic, and you could be fooled into thinking that it is easy drawing, right? It has relatively few lines. It conveys information in a simplified format. But the longer I've been doing this, the more I realize that there is the sort of basic learning how to draw section of the work, and then there's a much more subtle gradation that happens in the latter half of somebody's community or possible community career. That's the word I'm looking for. Through a longer period of time, which is the like refinement stage. And actually, the art of cartooning is the art of distilling realistic images down into the minimum number of lines necessary to communicate an idea. And not everybody works in this way. You have artists who are really into cross hatching, like my buddy Landis Blair, who does beautiful work, but it's very engraving like. And that I think is still a form of distillation, but it is good to remember that constantly what we are doing is translating the world around us into more graspable forms. And this is particularly helpful when it comes to explaining complex systems or fields that the general public might not be as familiar with. And finally, to that point, my last, and I think maybe most important for this talk, point is that cartoonists illuminate the invisible. There are things out there, systems. We saw somebody in the chat talking about making DNA comics or comics about the COVID-19 virus. There are things that we do not visually see with our eyes. And I think kelp farming is also one of these, right? For a lot of folks, when you go and see a kelp farm, it's like, cool, here's a collection of buoys on the surface of the water. Is that a farm? I don't know. I can't see underneath it. And we'll look into a little bit of how this has played out in my own career. But just more broadly, I want to emphasize that when you are a visual thinker coming to translate ideas and relationships and systems to the page, you are illuminating the invisible. And this is probably the most important thing cartoonists can do as science educators or as anything educators. We are making complex systems or invisible factors in our society and world graspable and tangible and knowable to people, which is fun. Okay, so made comic about tall ship sailing in started making those in 2010. 2014, I get invited to sail aboard the Charles W. Morgan, the last wooden whaling ship in the world. And she had undergone a huge restoration after not sailing for nearly 90 years, had just been sitting on the dock in Mystic Seaport, and they put together an incredible program called the 38th Voyage, where they invited a bunch of people across all different kinds of fields. So the artists, musicians, scientists, storytellers, like shantyists, shantiesmen, and brought them all on board for a voyage that spanned the eastern seaboard over the course of many months. And for every leg of the voyage, all of these interpreters were placed on board in groups, and we were invited to make something in our chosen field about the experience to capture this for posterity, because this was a ship that hadn't sailed really in living memory and got to go back out. And this is a ship that would have been very similar to the one that Herman Melville shipped out on, and was a whaling ship, and so formed the real life inspiration for the vessels in Moby Dick. And what I ended up doing with this project was drawing a 24-page comic, I think, that was really just an autobio chronicle of what it was like to be on board this vessel, to come back into contact with my own identity as a tall ship sailor, and to really ruminate on what it means to be on a ship like this that is a piece of living history. The vessels that I grew up working on are replica ships, so they're about as old as I am, and this one is obviously more than that. There are timbers in there from 1841, and they're just still part of the ship, which makes me very emotional. Anyway, this was a fantastic experience. It was 11 years ago. And the wild thing is that these things have a long tail. And I want to keep naming the timeline here because, again, winging it, right? But in hindsight, these opportunities all lead into each other. So whoever you connect with today in this conversation or in the aquaculture information exchange boards afterwards or on social media, just keep in mind that those connections may end up bringing you to places or opportunities or projects you cannot imagine right now down the line. This one is actually taking me to Avery Point, Connecticut this summer to the International Melville Society Conference, where I'm going to go meet a bunch of academics. Reading the agenda for this conference, it absolutely blew my mind because this is the largest single author society in the world. So you're going to have academics from all over the place coming together. The theme for this year's conference is Oceanic Melville, so it is specifically talking about the sea and Melville. And the range of subject matter on the papers people are presenting is wild. There is what you would expect, like literary analysis of Moby Dick, and then there's somebody who's got a paper all about visual depictions of women in printing in the early 19th century. Like, great. I love that somebody studies that. This is the thing, is that if you get really hot for people who have got a super specific niche, you're going to do great in this field. Anyway, long tail, right? This was an opportunity I had so long ago, and yet this comic is still opening doors and getting me in places. So from there, we're going to jump to the polar opposite, to a much more contemporary vessel. In December of 2016, missing a space in that slide there, whoops, I was invited to join RV Falkor, a much more cutting edge oceanographic research vessel. And this opportunity came about, again, because the chief engineer on this vessel, Colleen, was a former tall ship sailor who had read Baggy Wrinkles back in the day. And when she noted that they have an artist at sea program, like a residency program, actually just put my name forward and then contacted me and was like, apply for this. You will get it. I showed them your book. They love it. You should go. So again, long tail, gets you in places you never could have imagined. This trip was absolutely fantastic. Here I am at the front of the vessel. Oh God, what was his name? Brock, I think. It has been a long time. But somebody brought the world's longest, like, jury rigged, what's it called? Selfie stick. That's the word. So this is all of us having the time of our lives in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this trip because we're starting to get into content that is more similar to what we're doing with ocean rainforest. So we were traveling from Guam to Hawaii to Honolulu, where I met Michelle, also a Falkor Artist at Sea graduate. And our specific area of interest was the Johnston Atoll, which is 2/3 of the way between. And when we started, the Johnston Atoll looked like this if you zoomed in on it on Google Maps. It is sort of vaguely defined using something called radar altimetry, but didn't actually have a highly detailed map of the bathymetry of the region. So what we were engaged in doing is something that looks like this, which I think is a great candidate for cartooning because it's already deeply visual. So this is what ocean floor mapping looks like. These wide swaths as you move back and forth over the ground are created by multi-beam sonar arrays that move off the bottom of the vessel, sweep across the ocean floor, and are pinging up and down to create these 3D maps of what is happening on the seafloor. And it's done by computers now. If you want to read an absolutely stellar book by Hallie Felt, it is called Soundings, and it is about Marie Tharp, who, with her partner Bruce Hazen, was responsible for producing the earliest total bathymetric maps of the seafloor. They were published by National Geographic and were done entirely by hand at a time when gathering this data was absolutely insanely time consuming and mind numbing, and it is just extremely cool. I think everyone should know about her. She's great. So this is us actually mapping the Johnston Atoll. We are sort of lawn mowering our way back and forth across it. And again, this is already a very visual practice and something that really made a lot of sense to me. And then this is what we came up with. This is one of the seamounts around the Johnston Atoll, which is kind of like an underwater hill or mountain. And with an overlay of texture on it, that's kind of the computer's approximation of like what that looks like. So already very visual, already something you could slap on a poster and give a presentation on at a marine conference. But what if comics? So while I was on the vessel, I was doing a lot of sketching just in my notebook because one of the things about going on these expeditions is it's not just about explaining concepts. People want to know what it is like to be there. Spoilers for this one, it was really like being in a floating hotel. There was Wi-Fi, there was incredible food, there were bunk beds and electric lights and all these things that coming from vessels built in 1841, I was kind of like, oh my God, wow, this is living in the lap of luxury over here. You can check the internet from the middle of the Pacific, which was kind of a bummer, if I'm honest. I think one of the things I like about tall ship sailing is that it forces me to not be in contact with the regular world, but we were doing science, we needed the internet, we were waking up in the middle of the night to give school presentations to kids all over the world, and that was great but challenging because 4 a.m. is like a much harder time to get up to talk about seafloor mapping than 9 a.m. So grateful to Aquaculture Information Exchange for having this be at a decent hour. So during this time, I ended up making a 12-page comic during the 2 weeks we were at sea because we were headed to a gallery exhibition in Honolulu of Artist at Sea projects, and I needed to have something done by then. So in the 2 weeks that I was on board, I was working with people to figure out what it was they were doing and translating it into a comic that could then be printed, colored, distributed for free to everyone. And that comic was Mapping the Floor, which led directly to working with ocean rainforest. So going back to talking about characters, the people who I was working alongside on the vessel, John, Jonathan, and Joyce, were fantastic characters. Like all of them so passionate and fascinated about their fields. Joyce has been working in multi-beam sonar mapping for decades. Jonathan was so enthusiastic about rocks. John, more understated, but very passionate about what he did. And the thing that makes me crazy internally about science is that it is a field dedicated to impartial and like just the facts, ma'am, reporting on what people are doing because there is a drive towards impartiality. Great. I respect it. It can stay over there. I am in the business of making goofy cartoon people, and I believe that one of the most important assets in science communication is highlighting the people who make this work possible, because in person, they are so funny, so committed, so interesting. And that's why I love gatherings like this, because we're actually in the room together, right? And getting to talk about what it was that they were studying, getting to interview them, and then translate their passion into these little illustrations um, was really the biggest joy, I think, for me, is introducing people to characters. And that's really something that I try to bring to all of my projects, because I think it's a good thing to remember that humans do science, and humans are curious about the world around them, and humans work together to gather data and learn things about the world and then help protect it. That just seems like something we really need to come back to in this particular moment in time. Um, so after all that work, right, these colors, by the way, are by Joey Weiser, another fantastic cartoonist who came on to help me get this project across the finish line. And this is basically the same information you were seeing in that initial image of us doing the ocean floor mapping, but it's got, easy bullet points, it's got handwriting, it's got clear colors, and you can now share something like this on social media. You can hand it to anybody who doesn't have an understanding of multi-beam mapping. And my goal is for an image to be able to immediately bring somebody on board with what it is that is happening in the field. Again, invisibly, right? This is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No one is going to just stumble on and see, like, oh, what are you guys up to today? It's not going to happen. So this comic went out into the world. It was taken to the Ocean Sciences meeting. It was distributed for free by the folks at the Schmidt Ocean Institute, who own Falkor. And this leads me all the way to how we got where we are today. It's 9:30. We're doing great. So Blue Robotics are headquartered in California, and one of their employees, Tyler Buckingham, is a friend of mine from Ojai, the town that I grew up in. And Tyler was moving some books out of a bookshelf and stumbled on his copy of Mapping the Floor, showed it to his boss, Elisa, and reached out to me and was like, hey, we love this. Can we do this with you for something else? And we talked about all kinds of different projects, and I was interested in a whole bunch of them because they have irons in all kinds of different fires. But the one that really grabbed me that I couldn't let go of was kelp farming. I don't know anything about kelp farming. I had never really considered kelp farming as a practice. But it turns out that Ocean Rainforest have been running a pilot program in Santa Barbara, 45 minutes from where I grew up. And Tyler said that they could get me out on the water on a boat, which is, of course, the catnip that has me all in, committed to any project at any time. So this is the stages that this project went through to get where it is at this point, which is pretty darn close to finished, and will, kind of like the Mapping the Floor comic, be something that can be taken to ocean sciences conferences and other research spaces to be distributed to people who might be curious about this area of study, which is, from all of the information I've downloaded in the last 6 months, really undergoing a huge resurgence in the US, but has been a big industry globally for many, many, many decades, and thousands of years. I mean, people have been working with kelp for a long time. So again, you remember earlier I said, like, what is a kelp farm? It's kind of invisible. This is what you get when you go out to a kelp farm. And you see a lot of buoys, you see some water, there's a vessel. You can't even really see this level of detail in the buoys if you don't have a drone to go up and get an aerial shot. And most of the action is happening in the water column below the surface. And so, much like the bathymetry project, we wanted to create something that would highlight what it is that is happening underwater. Oh, this is a slide that has things on it. Oh, right. Okay. This is what I was given to understand. This is the farm, which I'm sure some of you will look at this and go, absolutely, that makes perfect sense to me. I can picture this in my mind's eye. This is how the farm is laid out. Totally makes sense. Personally, didn't do it for me. I squinted at it and looked at it upside down and right side up and kept going, okay, so the big buoys and then the bottom ones are I just couldn't get it. You get something like this, a little bit better, a little bit more three-dimensional, right? You can kind of see there's a bit of elevation. You can see there's some vertical lines coming off of there. This is part of like a scientific presentation poster. But overall, again, kind of like the visuals we were seeing from the mapping expedition, this didn't quite click for me as a visual thinker. So I got to go out on the boat. This was really commonplace for the folks at Ocean Rainforest. They're literally just going out to take readings, take a look at the kelp, see if everything is still in place. They do it every 2 weeks. It's kind of rote and regular for them, but it was very exciting for me to have a day out on the water. It's been a while for me. And top left, you can see the vessel that we took out. And at right, these are little baby kelps. This is giant kelp that they are growing on the pilot farm. This is Sam Reeves. Again, characters. Sam was great. He was so helpful and enthusiastic, and obviously, as you can see, extremely psyched about kelp farming. And this is the Blue Robotics Blue ROV2. So Blue Robotics, I think, are doing a great thing here, which is that they're bringing me on to make this educational poster, not as a sales brochure, which there are plenty of companies, I think, who would want to do that with a cartoonist, but they were actually saying, hey, these folks happen to be using one of our remote operated vehicles to go check out their kelp farm and keep tabs on the infrastructure. But we don't need you to call it out by name in the poster. We don't need this to be about its features. We genuinely just want to raise awareness about this field and help explain how it functions, which is great to me. You know, I have done jobs that are more about advertising, and that's its own niche, but this kind of thing is really up my alley. And it's a super cool, I mean, it is a very cool thing to have. Typically, remote operated underwater vehicles have been very expensive in the past, and Blue Robotics have made one that is much more accessible financially, rather than tens of thousands of dollars. You're talking about like $5,000 for something that can travel underwater and give you visual looks at what is going on down there. So if you don't want to send a human diver down to investigate what's happening on the farm, you can do that. At this stage, my notes look like this. I carry a pocket notebook with me everywhere while I'm on the place. Here it is. And it's just like page after page of, you know, fiddly, like me frantically writing as fast as I can and probably getting facts wrong. Again, here I am on the right, like desperately trying to understand the farm infrastructure and still not quite getting it. But everyone was very patient with me and explained it as many times as I needed, which was awesome. This is Brendan Cox, who is one of the project technicians at Ocean Rainforest. And if it looks like he's playing video games in the cabin of the vessel, that is because he is. The blue ROV is controlled by a video game controller. And what you see on the laptop screen is Brendan piloting it around with the little joysticks to go take a look at what's happening on the farm beneath the surface. So again, within this realm of science, there is already visual communication happening within the team, and it's something that just needs a little bit of translation to become more accessible. And then this is me, an adventure cartoonist who only threw up just one little time once. I was very cool about it. I pretended like I was looking at dolphins and then just kind of off the side. And I think nobody noticed until I said anything. And this is the sad truth of the matter, is that I do get aggressively motion sick, which is a terrible trait for someone who loves to be on the ocean and wants to be out at sea all the time. I was on seasickness medication the whole 2 weeks I was on Falkor. When I've been sailing on the Lady Washington or other vessels, I sometimes get used to it, but in general, it is just like, it's just kind of the cost of admission. And definitely looking at somebody piloting an ROV camera on a laptop inside a cabin on a moving vessel was like, there's a reason there's only one photograph of that, and it's because every time I tried to go take reference photos, I was like, oh, no, that's not going to work. So definitely that was a challenge, but that's okay. Most of the drawing that I do is back ashore and don't have to do all of that on the boat. It's sneaky. For those of you who haven't spent a lot of time at sea, this was also one of the days where it wasn't like it was rough out there, but it was the slow roll. And actually, when it's calmer, I find that is worse for me equilibrially. So again, more big notes here about what the kelp actually looks like. I had some great conversations with the folks at Ocean Rainforest, and this is, for cartoonists, this is Oh my God, everyone's telling me their seasickness stories. Seasick while snorkeling is like really dire. I'm so sorry, Dylan. Uh, but what I love asking specialists is what is something in the typical visual depiction of your field that drives you crazy that isn't correct? Because I definitely have these beefs with people drawing sailing vessels and like putting the shrouds, which are the sort of rope laddery things that go up either side of the mast. They rig them wrong, they make them saggy, they don't make sense. There's all kinds of stuff that makes me insane. So I was asking the folks at Ocean Rainforest, what is your beef about how people generally draw giant kelp? And taking notes because I wanted to make sure that my illustration didn't fall prey to any of those common issues. And then we move into prototyping. So taking all that information and then trying to make posters. And I have so many of these little fiddly folded bits of paper. There they are. Because it turns out that if you are somebody who goes to, say, a national park like Joshua Tree, you get one of these handy little maps. There are a lot of different ways to open these. I contemplated having everyone fold a piece of paper and then polling you all about whether, if you got a map like this, if you would open it like that, or would you open it like that, or would you do some other mysterious thing? Someone came up to Tyler and I while we were at a restaurant here in town having a confab about this, and we were just folding and unfolding giant pieces of paper over and over again. And I asked the waitress who came over, I was like, hey, could you open this for me just to show me what order you would do it in? And she did it in some mysterious third way that neither of us could have foreseen. So when you're dealing with something like this, which is folding, it is a really enjoyable problem for someone with my particularly diseased brain. Thank you, Ripley. Yeah, we're the same. Because you want to find out like what order someone is going to view the panels in, right? You want to be thinking about a poster as a comic book almost. So I did a lot of prototyping. I still don't think we have found a fail-safe method that like someone's going to be looking at something upside down at some point, and that's fine. What you end up doing is taking all those sketches and loose ideas. I like to do a lot of iterating digitally at this phase, but I was just kind of scribbling out ideas in the template that we'd made for where all the information would go and what order people would see them in. This is very placeholdery, but it helps me share details with the Blue Robotics team and the Ocean Rainforest folks so we can figure out what we're working with. And this gets printed out on bits of paper and then taken back to the computer over and over again while we figure out the dimensions. I do like to work on physical paper, and actually, because this poster is quite large, here's the actual piece of paper that is a photograph of. So you can see, like, it's big. And I find drawing on actual paper is just the way that my brain likes to think best, even though digital layout works better for a lot of these projects. So I'm kind of moving back and forth between the realms. And then the stage that we're in right now is refinement. We're dealing with getting all of the data correct, having the text placed properly, and starting to make finished artwork. And I'm learning all kinds of stuff along the way in this project, and I want to make sure that my journey from ignorance to slightly more education is reflected in the poster for people who may not know anything about kelp to begin with. So I have learned in reading many a Wikipedia page and spending many hours in the library that kelp is actually a subgroup of seaweed, which is all part of the algae family. I've learned about different classifications. There are major color divisions. A lot of it is science that goes over my head, but that's okay. Thank you, Kat, for calling out that this font looks like the SpongeBob font. I thought so too, and that was definitely why we picked it. And we also end up having, little spot illustrations, right? These are just like simple things that can get thrown on the poster to show you all the things kelp can be used for. If you are here not from the aquaculture side, kelp can be used for so much stuff. It produces some substances that are really good for gelatinifying things. So it gets used in cosmetics a lot. It is, of course, a foodstuff. You have seaweed salad, you have nori. It can be used as an animal feed additive, which there's some crazy research out there about how if it's used as an animal food supplement for cattle, it can reduce the methane emissions in their farts, which are a huge contributor to global warming. Incredibly cool. It gets used in toothpaste a lot of the time. You can use it as a vegan gelatin additive if you don't want to use gelatin. And then it can also be used for fertilizer for plants, or as a fertilizer is maybe a slight misnomer, but like a plant probiotic. Think of it that way. It helps crops take up nutrients more effectively. Kit uses it in marbling. I want to hear all about marbling now. Man, okay, that's cool. I had talked to somebody about this. Yeah, because you're laying down a layer of gelatinous stuff, right? And then dropping the dye into it and pulling the dye through. Yeah, amazing. Love that. Okay, so remember this? We had this diagram, which, again, no shade to science people. I'm sure you get it. I don't get it. So what we ended up with was something that looks a lot more like this, which is more dimensional. It's useful to see at a sort of isometric angle, right? You can get a view of the ROV. You can see the infrastructure of the cables. You can see the people. This definitely is not to scale. Don't use it to try and create any kelp farms of your own, but we wanted to create something that we could label and have as a diagram to show people what was up. And then you also get stuff like this, which is much more in depth. And I'm not going to read off every step of this process because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. But this is basically distilling all of the stuff the folks at Ocean Rainforest showed me about how they are creating new little kelp spores and seeding them onto lines and then putting those lines onto the farm. This is a form of cultivation that was popularized in China in the 1950s. It's called longline cultivation. And there are lots of historic precedents for this. Basically, people have been doing it for a very long time. But the kelp spores are seeded onto twine that is wound around these long PVC cylinders. And then that twine, once it has little growing sporophytes, which are the small blade-like structures at the beginning of kelp, that small line then gets wound around larger marine line and sunk onto the farm as these vertical floating substrates, basically, that the kelp grows off of. And this is where the poster's at right now. We're still in the final stages of doing illustration-y things. I had some family stuff come up, so I have been, we've put this off for the time being, but still wanted to show you all kind of where we've landed. And this is going to get all, finished and zhuzhed up and printed out. And it will join an existing poster that they had already made, which is not on my desk next to me right now, but it is all about all the different ROVs. There's like an ABCs of ROVs poster that Blue Robotics have already made, where they highlight all these different underwater vehicles that are in play today. Whew, okay. A lot of information. I know I talk a mile a minute. The one thing I said to myself at the beginning of this talk was, Lucy, don't talk too fast. But there's so much in here and I want to tell you all about it. And I feel like it's just, ooh, so exciting. I get so excited about kelp now. That's a really fun thing, is to go like, oh, thank you, Nicolette, for that link to the poster. To go from 0 to 60 obsession about a subject you don't know anything about, that's like, my brain is tailor-made for this kind of thing. And I so love having a career where I get to do that. It's not necessarily going to become my whole career, but it remains a part of the big picture of what I do. And then like those little branches can kind of branch into other opportunities and connections. Okay, so for artists, of which there are quite a few of you in here, if any of this strikes you as intriguing um, and exciting, and you think, ooh, I want to do this and I'm not really sure how to start, here's some things that I want to urge you to do. Hold on to your curiosity. See if there are particular subjects, especially ones that have nothing to do with comics, that you are passionate about, because I guarantee that cartoonists have a role to play in basically every industry on Earth. I cannot think of a particular space or concept or field that would not benefit from the addition of a cartoonist. Remember that the skills that you bring to the table are intensely valuable, especially for organizations who are trying to communicate ideas to the wider public. I think we forget that when we are drawing little words and pictures and putting them in boxes, we're not just being indulgent and silly. We are actually bringing ideas to the surface in a way that is tailor-made for the world that we live in now, which is increasingly visual. And then don't be afraid to start the conversation. If you have those skills and you have a curiosity about something and you start Googling around to be like, ooh, Who are the people who are working in library advocacy in my local community? Do I know anybody who is studying native plants? If I don't know anyone, maybe I could go down to the local nursery and ask around. Maybe there is a farm stand that you want to highlight. If you are passionate about, boy, like Dan Knott, if you're passionate about hidden systems, infrastructure, the internet, how does the internet work? Another really great example of an invisible system. Dan did a whole book that is fantastic about these civic infrastructures that undergird our contemporary society and wanting to make them visible. Send somebody a cold email. It doesn't hurt, you know? I think if you're hard selling folks on like trying to pay you a lot of money for your thing up front, maybe sometimes that's off putting. Maybe it's not. Tech companies have money and tech companies are working in a lot of these spaces. If you don't want to work for tech companies, that's fine. You can also find ways to plug into local organizations that may have smaller amounts of money to pay out, but are still super eager to have a cartoonist involved. But I genuinely encourage you to say, this is who I am and what I do, and I would really love to help illuminate the mission of your organization or like explore a particular niche. Generally, people in these fields are so excited and happy to talk about this stuff with, especially with cartoonists. Your career path opens a lot of doors. And then for the farmers and aquacultists, I'm sorry, I don't know what the collective noun is, and I just decided to say aquacultists. It does feel a little culty sometimes, the way people talk about kelp on the internet. And I think my question to all of you is like, ooh, what is the thing that people say about kelp that you're like, no, no, that's not, it can't do that. Because I do get the sense that there is a bit of a bubble happening in the US right now, especially with the focus on like big tech money investing in blue climate solutions stuff. There's like, we see this with the carbon offset industry where there are some questions around like, great, yes, we want people to be moving towards this, but in an industry where folks are getting on board to try and make money, you always have to have a little bit of skepticism healthily on board to say like, okay, but like, why is this actually happening? And who is benefiting? Anyway, not to say that any of you are in a cult, or if it is a cult, it's one that I would like to join. But here are the questions I would put to you, or the encouragements, is to know your invisibles. What are the things in your field that are not readily apparent to the general public, something that is not easily graspable by people outside your field that you might need help explaining? Remember to elevate the characters. If you are doing this communication stuff internally and you want to talk about the people on your team, if you want to let them get on camera and explain what they do, especially if they're scientists who are forced to write in extremely dry technical language the rest of the time, please let them do that. It's so compelling to hear people talk about the thing they're passionate about. You don't need to hire a cartoonist for that. And finally, find your nerds. This is a two-way street. If you have, if cartoonists aren't knocking on your door saying, hey, I'm passionate about what you do, you can go out there and find the people who have hyper niche interests about your thing and make connections with them. Generally, if you find somebody who is a nerd for knowledge acquisition more broadly, like I am, then that's great because you can kind of plug them in anywhere. But it's definitely a good idea to focus on the people who are most passionate about your field. And then for everyone, just a quick reminder that you are probably going to throw up in the middle of an information gathering expedition at sea, and that is going to be totally fine. It's normal. Everyone does it, and you can be cool about it. You can also be a baby about it, and like that's totally okay. Really, the underscoring of this point, this is a funny slide, but my intention is to say humility and a willingness to look stupid and ask stupid questions are like top shelf skills when it comes to this field. Basically, all I am doing when I go on information gathering expeditions is being willing to play the noob over and over and over again and just say like, hey, I'm so sorry. I know I've drawn 5 diagrams about the kelp farm structure and I'm still getting it wrong. Tell it to me again. Tell it to me 6 different ways, and then on the 7th way, I'm going to get it, and then I'm going to distill all 7 of those ways into one thing that's hopefully going to make more sense. Okay, that is all the talking. Thank you for the talking part. Here's a slide with some places that you can keep in touch with me. And I've got a website, I've got a Patreon. A lot of what I do is possible because of people who have pledged money every month to help see me keep going. A lot of them are in the Zoom. Thank you for doing that and being here. And I've got an email address. You can email me. I do still have social media, but man, I don't like it there. So like, if you gotta follow me, you can do that at Lou Bellwood. But I've got a blog. I like having a blog. I like being on Patreon. I like having email. Oh, I have a PO box. PO box 734 Ojai, California 93024. Send me a postcard. That'd be nice. All right, that is the end of the sharing portion of the talk. We're done with that. Thank
Great.
you for being in the chat and sending so many lovely messages throughout. And Jay has joined us from
Yes.
AIE for the second half of this. So Jay, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Bailey had to run to a workshop. She's very busy. That was a great talk. When we were developing the AIE, I don't think we ever envisioned having an aquaculture illustrator come and give a talk. I mean, this is like beyond our hopes of kind of expanding into just different skills and people that are involved somehow in aquaculture. So this has been really great. Before we get on to the questions, we do have about 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to put a link to an exit survey in the chat. So please, if you have a chance, fill that out because it helps us make these talks better. At this point, they're going pretty well though, and Joe, and who couldn't be here today. He's actually doing an aquaculture academy with Sea Grant, and he's up in either New Hampshire or Maine right now. But they've done a great job putting these talks together, and we're so happy that so many people showed up for this talk. So, Lucy, I don't know how you want to do this. We can put questions in the chat, but it seemed like you were more open to having a conversation. We just kind of have people raise their hands and
Totally, yeah. I mean, folks, raise your hands if you want to chime in or offer something. If you joined us late, ongoing invitation to post any links to what you're up to in the chat for people to follow up on, because I know we have a really great range of illustrators and aquaculture folks in this call, and just seeing my brain is like all the different potential crossovers of like, oh, Maris is doing comics about the ocean floor, and Kelsey's doing comics about algal blooms, and then Gabriel does like narrative paintings, and Dylan does history stuff, and Tara's doing like, anyway, there are a lot of cool people here, so there is lots of opportunity for folks to share their work if you feel like it. And if anyone has specific questions, feel free to just unmute or raise your hand, and I will do my best to answer them, or put them to someone else in the room who might also be able to answer them better than I can, because we've got the Blue Robotics team here from Edinburgh right now. Are you guys in Scotland? Am I remembering that right? I think so.
Currently in the UK, but we were in Edinburgh.
Lovely. Very nice. I was looking at your Instagram stuff. Yeah, Lauren, I see your hand.
Hey, thank you for the talk. This was awesome. This is maybe a question more for the scientists. Um, Thinking about different projects I've been part of and getting funding for your work, how do you all work in the money for paying artists and science communications or like community education into the funding for the work you do? I feel like a lot of times yeah, you kind of forget about it. I may be projecting here, but I feel like sometimes it is generally forgotten until later. And then how do you make it happen?
That is
Thanks.
such a great question that I cannot answer because I'm not on that end of it. Do we have any folks in the aquaculture realm, or who are working? I mean, we've got the Blue Robotics team. They can talk about that from their perspective. But yeah, I'm curious on a grant writing or other end of the spectrum thing. Anybody want to chime in on that?
Hi, this is Sarah. I'm down in Florida. I can tell you on our grants, it's not an allowable expense. So it's something we either have to beg, borrow, or have as I found a creative way to do it where we do it as a competition. And then depending on who our intended audience is, we do it as either middle school competition, elementary school competition, or high school competition, or even if it's upper level audience, we will then pitch it out to our undergraduate art and design majors and ask them to take this, interpret it, and then please produce something that we would be able to then share.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that perspective. We've also got Fred in the chat saying writing it into grants under broader impacts.
Yeah, and I from Blue Robotics perspective, one of the hardest things is to break through and present information in a way that, particularly complex information, as Lucy referenced earlier in her thing, in a way that's really clear. That's a priority for us. So we invested in it, and as a technology company, as a private company, we can do that. I think that as this community of professionals, and hopefully through talks like this, we can collectively work to investing in this more. Like, I think that this is an area where we all need to realize that there's a tremendous value in being able to communicate science very clearly, and that artists and other storytellers, people that are usually kind of afterthoughts in the research process, really, that it shouldn't be an afterthought. It needs to be a core part of the mission of science.
Thanks, Tyler. Ethan, I see your hand up as well.
Hi, yes. Thank you for the presentation. That was really great. I actually came in a little late, so maybe potentially missed this, but I'm wondering what sort of online tools you use for making some of these graphics, or I mean, it kind of looked like maybe Canva was one you're using. I know that's pretty popular now, but yeah, I'm just curious on some things that not necessarily maybe for the drawing because I can't do that as well, but even just the kind of poster presentations.
Yeah, totally. Canva is a good option for folks who are not as familiar with graphic design software. My personal tech stack is more industry specific. I do a lot of my drawing in either Procreate on the iPad for quick sketching, or a program called Clip Studio, which is explicitly for drawing comics. And then most of my layout stuff is happening in Adobe InDesign or Illustrator if I'm trying to make more vector artwork, which is basically a mathematical line-based version of the art that can scale infinitely. So if you wanted to print it on a big banner, you could do so. And those tools are, as you say, like they're more art forward, right? If you're doing the drawing part of things. But Canva's a really good option. If you don't want to go all in on the Adobe ecosystem, there's a suite of programs called Affinity, who they basically have all the things that Adobe do, but at a much lower price point. And that can be really helpful for getting some layout software. And I mean, the internet is rife with video tutorials for how to use this kind of stuff. But yeah, if anybody else has good suggestions for kind of roll your own image editing software online, aside from Canva, I'm sure there are other options out there in this day and age for folks who are interested in making graphics for social media, for example, which I know a lot of us are engaged in doing, and it is exhausting and thankless work. But having that be kind of clear and approachable and easy to produce, Canva can be good for that for sure. Great question.
Thank you.
Anyone else in our last couple of minutes? We're right at 10, but if we have pressing questions, I'm sure we can squeeze one or two in.
I've got one very important question since you live in Ohio. Do you
Yeah,
get
Jay.
to see the Bionic Woman, and how is she doing?
Haven't seen her in a long while, but it is a town that is rife with various celebrity people. It is true. So it's what can I offer in that hot gossip vein? I saw Malcolm McDowell the other day. He came to visit my dad in the hospital. That's what I can offer you. He left the building saying, "Get well soon, you magnificent animal," to my dad, not to me. Although I am also unwell, but not with the virus that landed me in the hospital. So that's better. Let's see, I'm just catching up in the chat. Oh, Linda, great question. Why we call this a poster when it doesn't seem like something you could put on a wall. That language came from Blue Robotics, and actually it was something that we were thinking about in the end use case. Yes, it is cool to have something that is a brochure. The original concept was we would be seating these in those like hotel banks of foldable map-based brochures for like local attractions, and thought it would be very cool to have something in that space that was like, oh, there's something in here about kelp farming that's not trying to sell me on a Disney cruise. I can just pick this up and learn about a science subject. But ideally, I would love it if these functioned as posters, right? Like when you look at a national parks one, it is actually something that like that's got a bunch of, you know, native plant information on it. It's got a big map on the back. Like you could hang that on a classroom wall if you felt like it. And the ABCs of ROVs poster also functioned that way. So the goal is to make something that is kind of dual purpose, right? You can have something that's easy to take away from a conference. You don't have to roll it up into a tube, but then you can put it up in a classroom. And Kit chiming in on that, saying that folded posters are also good for people carrying. Maris, I see you. Hello.
Hi, thank you for doing this. This was awesome. I had kind of a question slash comment, I guess, and this goes back to funding, but also design and illustration knowledge. So I think one of the things you touched on is not just transparency with a scientist, which is awesome, like getting the seaweed right, but also navigating design challenges and narrative challenges yourself. I've been toying with recently working with a professor and doing some guest workshops with her undergrads to talk about design literacy and narrative. So I'm wondering for the Sea Grant institutions, if you already have access to undergrad or professors, maybe there's a way to either fund or really get this information to undergrads or grad students to kind of bridge that gap. Because I think, I mean, part of Lucy, what you're doing is really important because it's not just communicating the science, it's like providing this opportunity, and we need more of that. And it's really nice because I've learned not to bark up the wrong trees because it's not helpful to work with scientists or research teams that don't see the value in what you're doing. But it's really nice when they do and they're eager to work with you. And I know you talked about finding your nerds, but I'm wondering if there's more. And it's not every cartoonist skill set to teach undergrad or to teach design. Like it's one thing to do it, it's another thing to teach it. But I'm wondering just for the scientists, education, and cartoonists in the room, maybe that's another way to look at funding, especially when funding is increasingly difficult and terrifying. I didn't want to say it in the room, but I've been
it's happening. It's the elephant in the room. We can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean the colleague I've been working with at MIT Sea Grant, we've been working for a year and a half to try and find grant funding for this. So, and it's something that's like a back burner thing, and he's looking and I'm looking, but I guess sorry, comment, question, concern, but know that like I'm thinking about this as a cartoonist too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maris, I think like the angle that you're coming at is very you have a lot, arguably more experience than I do in this field. I feel like you've been at this for much longer and like working, you know, in aquariums, and then also doing like comics publishing stuff and working in academia. Like there's just a wide network there. But yeah, talking about the whole national situation for those of us in the US, it is worth naming that like money is harder to come by. And this is actually something that the reason that I mentioned Patreon explicitly is that there are projects like this that, you know, if we have other types of funding models available for artists, it gives us the opportunity to offer our services to projects we believe in. And it's hard because then you got to build a sustainable background of like people who are willing to just see you go do whatever, and that's kind of on the individual artist. But I love the idea of making this an explicit sort of dovetailing with college courses, because design literacy is a huge thing that, again, as artists, we kind of take for granted, that we're like, yeah, of course you wouldn't put, you know, a paragraph smushed down on top of an image in this particular fashion. But I've noticed, especially on this project, that the actual illustration has been way less time overall than the amount of paper folding and prototyping I've been doing to be like, but okay, but how do you do it so that the art doesn't overlap the thing? Like not wanting to put text on the creases so that it wears out when you fold the poster too much and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's graphic design skills are deeply important in that. And I was curious to talk about what actually happens in a science communication degree, because I don't know. I'm not sure if those courses are being taught or if it's just like, oh yeah, you're going to take a lot of science classes and you're going to take some like scientific illustration classes, which is a little different from having design literacy. Yeah, great information to share. I don't want to take up too much of everybody's time because we are a little bit over the hour. But yeah, thank you again for your questions and thoughts, and feel free to email me if there's other stuff that I didn't touch on that you want some answers about. And Jay has been throwing links in the chat, but I have been really delighted and startled to see how many people are in the aquaculture information exchange space. It's like it's enormous numbers of folks in there being very excited about this stuff. And it's just always such a treat to stumble into a very niche collection of people who are very passionate about something. So that's been really great. If any of this speaks to you specifically in the aquaculture realm, which I should emphasize is not just kelp farming. We're talking about like sustainable fisheries. We're talking about oyster farming. We're talking about all kinds of other stuff. So if this speaks to you, do hop in there. Oh my gosh, I hope the chat gets saved as well, because I feel like I want to go create a list of everyone's websites. Kate is doing environmental education and nature journaling, which is super cool.
Yeah, it should be getting saved with the
Okay,
recording.
great. Love that. Yeah, and we've got a website for ocean rainforest as well, and Blue Robotics folks, if you want to put a link to your stuff in there if you haven't already. Hopefully, if someone's like, I'm not going to make comics, I want to go out and buy an ROV, forget all of this, they can do that. It's pretty cool. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is that they also make a boat that goes along the surface, which can do that multi-beam mapping type stuff that I was showing in the previous presentation, like in miniature. So again, making these technologies more accessible. You don't have to have an array strapped to a massive flippin' boat in order to do it, which is pretty cool. And Candace, yes, the meeting was recorded. It's going to be up on YouTube. So if folks want to check that out down the line or share it with other people who couldn't make it, that will be available as well.
Definitely.
Oof. Okay.
That
So
was
much
great.
talking.
Thank you so much. And yeah, please join us on the AIE. We do have, there's several communications groups. I mean, if you've got something that you want to talk about that's not aquaculture, but just want to engage with communicators that are, that are involved in aquaculture and fisheries, please feel free to sign up. Like Bailey said before, it's all free. This is all funded by NOAA and USDA while we still actually have any. So
Get it while it's good.
yeah. So thank you all very much for coming, and I'm gonna end the chat now. But good to see everyone. Hope to see you
Thank
here.
you, Lucy. That was
Yeah,
amazing.
thank you all. Such a
Thank
pleasure to
you.
see you. Thanks for spending the morning with me.